First, we need to find the 11 reference image. During the crafting process, we need to constantly compare the shapes and sizes in the image to increase our chances of success. This is the front view of the Maine Coon. This is the side view. Before we start, let's take out our handle. 1 medium needle. 1 fine needle. What we are teaching everyone to make our small dolls. So we are providing these two types of needles. The medium needle is slightly longer than the fine needle. The tip of the medium needle is also slightly thicker than the fine needle. Both types of needle tips will have many small barbs. During the felting process, the barbs move the wool, causing the wool to interlock. To achieve the felting effect, the medium needle felts faster and is used for shaping in the early and mid stages. The felting speed with fine needles is relatively slow. It is used for later light felting to make the surface of the doll smooth and even. When making larger or even larger works, the following will be used: large needle, 3 needles tool, 7 needles tool. These types of needles have a particularly fast felting speed, so they are used for making large works. The medium and fine needles provided for everyone make it easier to create small dolls. First time using a felting needle, we need to take a needle out of the needle holder. New needles are coated with anti-rust oil to prevent the felting needle from rusting. Before we use it, you can wipe off the rust-proof foil on the surface with a paper towel. The correct way to clean the needle is to gently wipe along the direction of the needle. After cleaning, it can be used together with the handle. When cleaning the needle, remember not to wipe back and forth. This can easily lead to the needle accidentally piercing your finger, causing injury. If the needle is not used for a long time, to avoid rusting, you can apply rust-proof foil or cooking oil to the surface. After oiling, store it in a needle case. Using the needle. When felting wool, the needle needs to be kept vertical to the wool being felted. Insert the wool in the direction of the needle tip. When pulling the needle out, it needs to be pulled out in the opposite direction of where it was inserted. Then repeat. Continuously repeat. This will allow the wool to felt. When felting wool, make sure to apply force in the direction of the needle. Do not press the needle. Pressing the needle can easily lead to breakage. Also, do not lift the needle upwards after inserting it into the wool. This can also cause the needle to break. Then take out our handle. Pull out the wooden plug inside the handle. You can see one end is relatively large. One end is relatively small. Take the end of the needle with the hook and fit it into the groove of the smaller end. Then put our needle back into the handle. It can't be loose like this. Push it in tightly with some force. This way it won't loosen up. Next, we need to prepare the workbench. To better demonstrate for everyone, the video uses a white foam pad. Before starting, you can put on finger cots. The shorter one is worn on our thumb. The longer one is worn on our index finger. Like this. For beginners, it is very necessary to wear finger cots to prevent our needle from injuring our hands while felting. Once you become skilled, you can take off the finger cots to operate. In the instructional video, to help everyone see better, The demonstrator did not wear finger cots. For better distinction in the instructional video, we use a wooden handle to represent the fine needle, and a blue handle to represent the medium needle. In reality, you may receive 2 wooden handles. You can use 1 wooden handle to install the fine needle, and 1 wooden handle to install the medium needle. For convenience of distinction, you can make marks on the wooden handles. There are 2 types of handles, wooden and plastic. The functions of both types are the same. It's just the material that is different. First, let's make the head of the Maine Coon. The head is shaped like a round ball, so we need to start by making a round ball. Take out the wool. First, take out the mixed color wool from inside. Use the needle end to wrap it, tightening it a bit inside. Let's first roughly wrap the head. Compare it with the blueprint. It's probably about this size. We need to separate the wool from this point. When separating, you should stay a bit far apart. If you are too close, you won't be able to pull apart. This should be what it looks like when it's done. The other end is a bit more neat like this. Next, we will demonstrate how to wrap the wool tightly. Start from here. Roll the wool. Wrap it forward like this. Both hands should come together in the middle. You must press down with your thumb. Continue to wrap. When wrapping the wool, it is crucial to ensure that the wool is kept tight and not loose. Continue to wrap. Use the fuzzy end like this to connect the tail, the surface will fit better. The wrapped wool should have a fuller side. And when you pinch it, it should feel quite firm. Let's compare the size once again. Let's take a look. It should be about the same size as the one in our picture. It's a little too big. Let's remove some wool. You can pull the wool off from the side like this. Or gently pull the wool off from the bottom near the tail. Okay, let's try again. It's almost done like this. Note that when we are wrapping the wool, if we just gently wrap it forward like this, the wool wrapped this way will have a flatter side and will feel quite soft when squeezed. During the later felting process, it will require more time for the wool to felt properly to become firm. When we are wrapping the wool, we must make sure to wrap it tightly. Next, we will use the medium needle to felt the wool. Before we start felting, we need to have a work surface underneath. Everyone must remember to use a gray felt pad underneath while felting. Here, in order to better demonstrate to everyone, we'll use a white foam board. Take out the medium needle and make sure to poke deeply. You can first secure a few stitches at both ends to prevent the wool from coming apart. Then go around and felt it in the direction we wrap the fur. At the beginning, you can go a little slower with the needle. When it's close to your fingers, be careful to watch the needle's position to avoid poking your hand. Then flip the wool and continue felting. We can also hold it like this, using both hands to control the wool. Don't let it spread out in this direction. The video is edited, the actual production time will take a bit longer, so it requires some patience. We need to shape the wool into a ball like this. Pull this part inward to slowly turn it into a ball shape. When we are felting, we can poke from this position upwards. On the other side, poke from the middle up to the top. This video is sped up so the actual making time will be longer. It requires a bit of patience, but let's keep going. You can roll it in your hands a bit, then continue to poke it with the medium needle. At this point, it's still quite soft, so you need to keep using the medium needle to make it firmer. Now our wool has attained a certain degree of hardness, and it's a bit difficult to poke with the medium needle, so we can switch to the fine needle to continue felting. Slowly refine the rougher surface to make it smoother. Make sure to constantly flip the wool, trying to make every part tight. Make sure to poke from the middle towards both ends. You can angle the needle slightly to make it easier to form a ball shape. The base of the head is completed. Let's take a look to see if the size is appropriate. It's a little bit big. Because the cat's fur is added later, we need to make the initial sphere a little smaller. If you find that it's a bit too big, you can use scissors to trim it down a bit. If you think it's too small, you can take some wool to wrap around the sphere, and then use the needle to felt it. During the making process, try to repeatedly compare the size with the blueprint. Avoid making it too big or too small. Next, let's make the face. There is a bump in this area of the nose. The mouth consists of two raised spherical parts. The chin also has a slight bulge. Take a look at the shape from the side. Pay attention to the raised shapes and their positions. Next, let's make the face. Take a small amount of wool and pull it apart from the middle. Take a slightly smaller amount. Fold. This will be used to create the mouth part of the Maine Coon with one on each side. The middle part is the position of the kitten's nose. It's about half the height of the entire head, and the middle of the mouth on both sides is also at the center of the head. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Use the same method to make the other side. Be careful your fingers, use the needle slowly and don't poke yourself. If you think this area is too small, we can add a small amount of wool. At this point, make sure to use a smaller amount of wool. Don't add too much. If it seems a bit excessive, remove a small amount. Otherwise, it will be easy to misjudge the amount and end up making it too big. Now let's make the nose. Take a bit of wool and rub it a little. First, secure this bottom part, then the left and right sides. Take some wool and rub it in your hand. Then add it to the chin area. Next, let's make the body. The body part is shaped like a cylinder. Wrap the wool into a cylindrical shape, making sure to wrap it tightly. Use the medium needle to poke deeply for securing. Be careful to poke slowly with the needle so you don't poke your hand. Poke from both ends towards the center to prevent the wool from spreading out from both ends. The medium needle is generally used for shaping and can felt quickly. Continuously turn and use the medium needle to compact it tightly. Once the medium needle has compacted it tightly, switch to the fine needle to continue refining. When felting from top to bottom, make sure to move your hand below a little to avoid poking it with the needle. add some wool to the bottom to make it a bit fuller. The top surface of the neck can be slightly indented in the middle to better fit the shape of the head. Fold the wool into a bowl and place it at the lower part of the cat's body to create the cat's hip. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Turn it over like this to poke it. The video has been edited. The actual production time is longer, so it requires a bit of patience. Let us keep going. Next, we will connect the head and body together. Press down on the head and body with your hand. From the edge of the head, use the needle to poke. You can also turn it around and secure it from the body to the head. Let's take a look. The connection points of the limbs and body. The shoulder and hip areas need to be a bit fuller. So the cat's shoulder and hip need to have wool added like this to create a three-dimensional effect. Fold the wool into small balls and add them to the lower part of the body to make the hip. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Use the same method to add on the other side. If you feel it's not fluffy enough, you can add another piece of wool. The shoulder uses the same method. It's slightly forward. Next, let's make the legs. The front legs are a bit longer. The hind legs are a bit shorter. There are some paws. Roll the torn wool into a long, thin cylindrical shape. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Continuously turn and poke when making small items. Pay attention to the needle position. Poke a little slower to avoid poking your hand. Use a fine needle to poke a thin line deeply as the kitten's claw art. But the back end not poked makes it easier to connect to the body later. After finishing, use scissors to trim any excess wool from the edges. Next, let's connect the legs. Place the front legs at the shoulder position and use a fine needle to poke deeply to connect. The hind legs are connected in the same way. Let's take some wool, tear it apart, fold it, and add it to the kitten's hip to make it fuller. Now, let's learn how to tear wool. Divide the wool into smaller strips, then pull it apart from the middle. Then change direction and pull apart from the middle. Change direction and pull apart from the middle. Repeat this step several times. Then break off the long fiber. Be sure to constantly change direction. Until all of these long fibers are torn apart. This should be what it looks like when it's done. Spread the torn wool evenly and lay it on the surface. At this time, use fine needle to gently poke and secure. Poke the edge in the direction of the fiber so the surface is smoother and the transition is more natural. This step is to make the connection marks invisible. Additionally, if the shoulders and hips are not full enough, you can add more wool to stab at this stage. Just lay a thin layer. Be sure to gently poke and do it lightly, as too much force will cause deformation. Make sure the position of the front chest connects naturally, and you also need to lay down wool and stab it. Let's take a look at the pattern. For the front head, the pattern is mainly on the upper part. The lower mouth area should be left empty. Then let's take a look. Mainly focused on this area of the back. But the front part of the legs should be left empty. The area around the belly should also be left empty. The method for creating the pattern is to first use this light gray color as a base, and then use a darker mixed color wool to create the pattern. Take the torn light gray wool, and we will first make the light colored part of the pattern. Use a fine needle to lightly poke and secure. Be sure to gently poke. Deep poking will cause deformation. Angle the needle a little in this way. The surface needle holes will be smaller. The color doesn't need to be applied very evenly. Having some dark and light areas is fine. It looks more natural and closer to the real fur color of the cat. The top of the head also needs to be done with a light gray wool as a base color. Note that the cheek area should not be covered with wool, leave it empty. Take shredded iron gray and black wool and mix them together to create mixed color wool. If you want it to be darker, add more black. If you want it to be lighter, add more gray. You can change direction and continue to tear it apart. Place it on the body to add some striped patterns. You can refer to the pictures for a general range to create them, and feel free to add specific locations as you like. Note that the direction of the patterns should be horizontal. The striped patterns can be intermittent, with varying thicknesses, which looks more natural. The upper part also requires a base color. You can add more black wool to deepen the color, especially to enhance the striped pattern and make it more three-dimensional. Our video is sped up, so the actual production time may be longer. It requires a bit of patience. Let us keep going. Take a long strip of mixed color wool, roll it into a rope shape with your hands and add it to the cat's paw area. hold it in place with your hand, then use a fine needle to poke it deeply to secure it. Let's take a look at the eyes. There is a black eyeliner surrounding the eyes. There is a white pattern. The nose is in the shape of a black inverted triangle. The mouth is formed by deeply felting with black wool to form a depression. Then there is a curve on both the left and right sides. First, we will use a fine needle to deeply poke the position of the eyes to secure them. The height is approximately at half of the face. Use glue to stick the patch eyes on due to international shipping reasons. Please use your own glue. You can adjust the position before the glue dries. Make sure the eyes are symmetrical and the height of both eyes is consistent. Add white wool to the eyebrow area to make the brow bone more three-dimensional. Lay mixed color wool and black and iron gray on the eyebrow area, and use a fine needle to lightly poke it to secure. Use black fine wool to surround the eyes, creating the kitten's eyeliner. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Use mixed color wool to intensify the pattern on the side of the kitten's nose as well as on the kitten's lower eyelid. The tip of the nose should also be deepened with mixed color wool. If you feel the color isn't dark enough, you can use black wool directly. Use store-in white wool to add around the eyes to create white patterns. Trim off any excess wool. The pattern on the top of the head is a bit light. Use store-in black wool to deepen it again. Creating facial patterns is a process that requires care and patience. We can refer to real-life images for guidance. The ear is a relatively narrow and elongated triangle. There is some white fur inside. Then, looking at the back, it is made of mixed color wool. Let's take a look at the position of the ears. The inner side of the ear is roughly at the position directly above the middle of the eyeball. Check the position of the ears from the side. Take blackened dye and gray wool, mix and tear it apart, then felt it into a thin triangular piece. Use a fine needle to deeply felt and secure it, slowly adjusting with the fine needle to shape the ears into a triangle. When felting the thin slices, make sure to keep flipping them over to poke them. If you feel the thickness isn't enough, you can add wool in small amounts multiple times. Since we will be adding a layer of white ear pattern later, don't make the ears too thick here. Using the same method, felt the torn white wool into triangular thin slices. Remember to keep flipping and poking. Overlap the two triangles, placing the white triangle on top, and use a fine needle to lightly poke it to secure. Use a fine needle to adjust the range of the white ear pattern, making it a bit smaller. Take out the white wool and fold it in half. Place it on one side of the ear and use a fine needle to poke it deeply to secure. Note that the right ear's wool is on the left side, and the left ear is the opposite. Use scissors to carefully trim the white ear wool to make it slightly shorter. If there is excess poked wool on the back, you can also trim it with scissors. Place the finished ears on the top of the head and secure them with a fine needle by poking deeply. Flip it over to the back and similarly poke deeply to secure. Pay attention to the position of the ears. Now let's take a look at the part for felting the face. From the front view, it goes from the chin area all the way down to the chest. From the side view, it connects from this part of the face all the way to the shoulder and neck area. The back area is where we felt from the top of the head all the way down to the neck. Note that this section uses mixed color wool, and this section uses white wool to make a connection. Take some white wool and place it at the cat's chin position. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure the wool in the middle. Flip the wool over and secure it again. Do the same to the other side. Repeat the above-mentioned process. Take the mixed gray wool and use the same method to secure it next to the eyes. Do the same on both sides. For the back of the neck, first wrap a circle of white wool around the neck. Use the mixed gray wool to plant fur on the upper part. Use scissors to trim the cat's fur vertically. You can do it in small amounts multiple times, gradually cutting it shorter. Let's take a look at the tail. The tail is in the shape of a long cylinder. First, we'll make a cylindrical base. Then we'll add the wool to the tail. The tail connects at the back of the body in this position. Roll the white wool into a cylindrical shape. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Tighten one end and leave the other end loose to create the tufts for connection. Use torn black and iron gray wool to add fur to the kitten's tail. Use a fine needle to poke deeply and secure it. Trim the excess fur with scissors. Secure the tail in the center back position of the kitten by using a fine needle. This should be what it looks like when it's done. Let's take a look at the finished product. And don't forget there's one last step, adding the whiskers. Use fine needles to poke a few small holes deep into the kitten's snout, then insert the whiskers. Use scissors to trim to the appropriate length. You can use glue to bond it together for enhanced strength. The Maine Coon is completed.